Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone across the Zoom DOM and around the world. Welcome to a new edition of the African Literature Association's lecture series, the last for the year 2021. My name is Akin Adeshokon. I teach comparative literature and African cinema here at Indiana University, Bloomington. And it's been my pleasure to coordinate this series with my colleagues, Girma Negash, president of the association, Matt Brown of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and James McCorkle of William and Hobart College in Geneva, New York. Today's event, the last in this academic year, is a panel of 4 speakers in honor of the memory and work of Djibril Tamsir Niane, the Guinean historian and writer, best known as the author of Sundiata, Epic of Old Mali, who passed on in early March this year at age 89. It is our pleasure to welcome our speakers and audience to this event, and I will introduce all speakers in a moment. As always, it is important to underscore the point that this series is one of the initiatives by the current Executive Council of the Association to engage our members' interests and to generate even more interest among literary communities across the world, particularly those in the field of African and post-colonial literary and cultural studies. This has become even more pertinent than before, that time when we didn't have to confront the reality of life in discrete mediated bubbles imposed by COVID-19 restrictions. These lectures are free and open to the public, so we hope that you will take the attention further by opting to join the association. For helping us to establish contact with some of our panelists, I would like to thank Professors Maria Grosch-Ngate and Joseph Helwell. They may or may not be present here, but would like to put this expression of gratitude on the record. Special thank you to Mohamed Kamara, current Vice President of the ALA, who agreed at a very short notice to help with translating Professor Bamba's presentation into English. A couple of observations will be in order to place this event for Niane in context, and I wanted to make them without preempting what the speakers have to say. In the first place, a few weeks after Niane died on March 8th, the literary world also received the news of the death of Nawal El-Saadawi, the Egyptian writer and physician, author of Woman at Point Zero and other works, who, strikingly, was born just a few weeks before Niane. There have been several obituaries of this incredible author, and I've noticed an event or two held in her honor in different parts of the world. There have been relatively few and obscure notices about Niane's passing, and we would like to put on the record the significance of figures such as he for the validity of the traditions we currently inhabit. This is because, and this is the second observation I want to make, there's just no credible way of talking about modern world literary history, let alone African literary history, without taking into account the path-breaking work of the generation of writers among whom we count Niane. With authors such as Hamadou Hampateba, Thomas Mofolo, Birago Diop, Daniel Fagunwa, and Maurice Condé in the specific sense, Niane has been credited with unearthing the buried tradition of Mande verbal arts, using writing, in the words of the literary scholar Abiola Irele, as the modality of expression for very present but scattered aspects of African experiences and material artifacts. In an important sense there, this was political work, best seen as an act of liberation. If we recall that Sundiata was published in 1959, the year after the publication of Things Fall Apart and of Sekou Touré calling Charles de Gaulle's bluff, which also came in the wake of the independence of Ghana in 1957. Much of what we take for granted about the sources and resources of African literature came through the reconstructive efforts of these authors, and it is easy to underestimate the revolutionary force of the choices they made in the face of well-structured habits of colonial and white supremacist thinking. There's so much more to say, and that is why we have this gathering of excellent scholars whose turn it is to be introduced. The first speaker will be Chiji Akoma. He's the Associate Professor of African and African Diaspora Literatures in the Department of English, and is the current chair of the Department of Global Interdisciplinary Studies at Villanova University in Pennsylvania. He is the author of folklore in New World Black fiction, writing and the oral tradition aesthetics, an immediate past president of International Society for Oral Literatures in Africa, ISOLA. His essays have appeared in African Literature Today, Research in African Literature, Wasafiri, and other places. The collection of essays on African oral tradition, titled Oral Literary Performance in Africa, Beyond Text, which he co-edited with Nduka Otiono, is published this month by Routledge. He will be discussing the hybridized form in which the Sunjata epic is represented in Niane's work, asking what does Niane's act of transposing an oral text into writing say about the malleability or immutability of African oral epic form, and what is the place of Sunjata, an epic of Old Mali, in the examination of the interface between the oral and the written in contemporary African lit tradition. So we'll start with you, Chidi.
Thank you. Good day. I gotta get my stuff in order. First, so thank you very much. First, let me thank the Executive Council of the African Literature Association for establishing this lecture series, especially in light of the pandemic. I would also like to thank Professor Akin Adeshokun, the coordinator and host of the series, for inviting me to be a part of today's session. My thanks too to Professor Matt Brown, our tech wizard and ALA webmaster. If you can see me and hear me, thank him. It's all to him. Finally, let me also say how honored I am to be a part of such a distinguished panel. Professors Eileen Julien at Indiana University, Professor Duran at SOAS, and Professor Bamba at Nyerere University in Guinea. I feel I should just hurry up with my remarks so I can get to hear you speak. So I'm delighted to speak about this text. Exactly 2 months ago, exactly on March 8th, to be precise, the great African historian and artist Jibril Niane succumbed to the ravages of COVID-19 at age 89 years. What is not as widely reported is that a few hours earlier that day, his twin sister, he was a twin, his twin sister, Yai, had also died. And so it was such a very, yes, they lived to an advanced age, but it was such a very shocking, sad outcome. And yet there was also something beautiful about it that seemed to magnify, if we needed another proof of the mystical relationship between twins. So on that same day, both siblings passed away to the same disease, only hours apart. So may their souls find peace in the great plains of the ancestors. In the 1980s, when history was still being taught as a required high school subject in Nigeria, one of the most interesting modules in the entire history subject for high school, secondary school students, one of the most interesting modules, at least for me, was the West African empires, the history of the West African empires, where you have Benin, Oyo, Dahomey, the Ashanti, Mali, Songhai, all of them. Each had its colorful architects and heroes, such as the dramatic orchestration by Okonfa Anochie that caused the golden stool to descend from the sky and literally drop on the lap of Osei Tutu, thereby consolidating the absolute power of Osei Tutu as the Asante Hene. And there were other stories, Kakonfo, Afonja, Oyo Empire, many Ewere in the Benin Empire, many of these colorful characters who had unique stories and unique experiences that they had to tell. But none of the historical figures, as far as I was concerned, was as colorful as the story of the founding of Mali Empire. There was the original Mari Jatta, son of King Nyerere Magan, the handsome, and the powerful hunchbacked wife, Sogolon. The challenges Sunjata faced growing up made his defeat of the Susu king Sumanguru all the more remarkable. Nearly a century after his feat, the great Mansa Musa, that legendary king who rubbished the value of gold in Egypt while on his way to the Hajj, would emerge as the greatest ruler after his great uncle, Sunjata. So then, imagine my surprise studying the African epic form at the university. And one of the texts we studied was Sundiata, an epic of Old Mali by D.T. Niane. I got to encounter in this second encounter, if you will, I got to encounter Sunjata again, not so much in the context of the rise and fall of empires, dates, historical sources, all the stuff that are the realm in the realm of history, verifiability, factuality, and the like. I got to experience it in a different way altogether. Not as, it was still a historical, it is still a historical figure, but not in that sense of history as far as events that happen, but in this new second encounter, but to encounter Sunjata as an epic hero, where the aesthetics of heroic poetry dominate. It is significant that the narrative, which will become Nyane's text, was based on the field work he conducted writing his academic thesis in France. We understand that Jeli Mamadou Kouyaté, whose oral performance constitutes the main epic text here, had been recorded for the Manding history embedded in the epic, the history which is the subject of his thesis, that is of Nyane's thesis. But in doing so, Nyane makes a move toward recognizing oral sources derived from the performance of griots and raconteurs as part of an African historiography. We note this in his preface, in the preface to the text, where Nyane writes, "Unfortunately, the West has taught us, meaning Africans, to scorn oral sources in matters of history. All that is not written in black and white being considered without foundation. Thus, even among African intellectuals, there are those who are sufficiently narrow-minded to regard speaking documents," he put that in parentheses, speaking documents, narrow-minded to regard speaking documents, which the griots are, with disdain, and to believe that we know nothing of our past for want of written documents. Nyane's argument about the legitimacy of oral history is in order, as is his indictment of neo-colonial African intellectuals who have embraced the privileging of the written word over the oral. But for the moment, I'm actually interested, and this is gonna be, I'm just gonna make these opening statements so that my colleagues can also make their presentations, and maybe we'll get into a fuller discussion after. But for the moment, I'm interested in this notion of the griot as a speaking document. We can exchange the term document here as Niane has used it. We can replace document for text, if only to enable us then appreciate the levels of textuality represented in one oral performance event involving the artist and their audience. Now, before I go forward further here, let me quickly say that I equally recognize the levels of semantic mediations and transformations that have taken place in the journey of the narrative from the griot's Malinke language, which Niane translated to French in 1959, 1960, and which then G.D. Pickett would then translate from French to English in 1965. Being neither proficient in French nor Malinke and recognizing the translation as an original text by itself, I shall be reading the English version as is. But so that some of the comments on language, I want us to be aware that I am aware that we are working to remove from the original voicing. But in any case, the popularity of the Sunjata epic accounts for its numerous performances across Mandan country. This would be in Senegal, Mali, Guinea-Bissau, Burkina Faso, Northern Liberia, some parts of Gambia and Guinea, all the places that would make up the great Mandan region. It is also one reason this popularity and its widespread, of his performance, that is also another reason why there have been many publications of different griot offerings of this particular performance. And what we see in these various transcriptions and performances and recordings, they give us a sense of the individual narrative temperament, what I like to call the narrative temperament of the griots. From the transcription, from the reporting, or some in the case where they're recorded, one can sense the energy, the vigor of some of the narrators, while in other cases, it seems that they are quite subdued, seemingly more engaged or more interested in the recounting of the story itself than in the performance. But in any case, from the recordings and transcriptions, you have the ones like Camera Laye has done, where Guardian of the Word, where he novelized the text. And there are different versions by John William Johnson and the rest of them. In many of these renditions, the folklorists have gone great lengths to transcribe the performance and render them in verse form, being that the narrative, many of these narratives are set to music, and the griot typically performs with an accompanist. Adhering to the best practices of transcription as advocated by the likes of Isidore Bell and Dennis Tedlock, these texts do try to capture as much of the dynamism of the text as performance as possible. But I'm not going to discuss the particularities of these texts for now. Instead, I'm interested in how Niane, how the book attempts to capture the ebullient oral performative spirit of Jelly Momodo Kuyate, while utilizing the resources of the written form to produce what could well be described as speaking document, as Niane describes the griot. In other words, I am interested in discussing the hybridized form in which the Sunjata epic is represented in Niane's work. The primary narrator is a griot rendering an oral performance of the Sunjata epic, But that performance is mediated by Nyane's own framing, his mostly successful transposition of the oral text to the written one, which we have in our hand. That is Sunjata, an epic of Old Mali. Crucial to the success of the text as both a gloriously realized epic performance and living history is Nyane's capture of the arresting voice of Jelly Kuyate and the authenticity of that voice. I'd like to read just the very opening paragraph, not the entire length, but the opening sequence of the text, where the griot announces, "I am a griot. It is I, Jelly Momodu Kuyate, son of Bintu Kuyate and Jelly Kidian Kuyate, master in the art of eloquence. Since time immemorial, the Kuyates have been in the service of the Keita princes of Mali. We are vessels of speech. We are the repositories which harbor secrets many centuries old. The art of eloquence has no secrets for us. We are the memory of mankind. By the spoken word, we bring to life the deeds and exploits of kings for the younger generations. My word is pure and free of all untruth. It is the word of my father. It is the word of my father's father. I will give you my father's words, just as I received them. Royal griots do not know what lying is." So you get this. So here it is. At the very beginning, there is a strategy here. There's an oral strategic move that is playing out here. We may call them rhetorical moves that are evident. First, it is important that the griot establish his bona fides. He comes from a long line of known artists that have a line that has direct association with the utmost royal pedigree, the Keitas. He is not a mere repository of history. Instead, he is master in the art of eloquence, he says. And because the spoken word has power, his are even more so, because with his words, deeds of the powerful, the kings, are kept alive through the talents of the griot. And for good measure, he tells the truth, he claims. He says he's incapable of lying. It's just not part of him. And so he establishes these ways, these modes of telling stories that would enable the reader, in his own particular case, the listener, to believe in the veracity of the text. Now, this is very important because remember, like I said at the beginning, that this is a recording that Nyane did as part of his thesis. He didn't go out to record the griot as an artist, even though he announces that he's the master of eloquence. It's about history that he was writing about. But here we find this intricate connection, this relationship that has been established between art, the aesthetics of storytelling itself, and the demands of history, in the light of at least identifying specific figures that are part of that narrative. So this is very important for us because in this particular, and that is how it shows up, these skills. In this particular performance by Kuyate, it's almost as though the deeds of kings are secondary to the recognition of the primacy of the spoken word, embodied in the griot's own body as text. The text we read on paper has come to us through the very live representation and is embodying in the voice, in the movement, in the face, in all the kinetic gestures of the griot. And so we see it embodied in that particular way. But now all that has been filtered, as it were, are now brought to us through the agency of Nyane on the pages. And so the privileging of the griot becomes very pronounced, for good measure, in fact. As far as Koyate, the griot, is concerned, the seizure of Sunjata's griot, Bala Fasake, by Sumaru is recounted as the last straw that triggers the inevitable war between Sunjata and the Susu king. And it goes on that way, that every move of Sunjata is seen or is represented through Bala Fasake. So here is Koyate, here is Jelly Koyate telling the story of Sunjata. But he, being a griot, he seems even more so interested in the affairs of Bala Fasake, Sunjata's griot. Almost as though to say, pay attention, pay attention to the griot. Yes, the king may well be the one to do the deeds, but unless he's spoken about, we may not get the full appreciation of those deeds. So we'll return to this discussion a little bit later on. But at this point, I think one of the things I would like us to consider is the way that in the representation of the deeds of Sunjata as an epic text, Nyane enters into the text, framing it. Yes, the first paragraph announces Koyate as the narrator, but the very preface that Nyane has framed, has used to introduce the text itself, conditions us now to understand, to look at the text or to read what is supposedly oral in a different context, to see all the ways in which that oral text is now being transformed into the kind of successful text that we see in Sunjata, an epic of Old Mali. We'll talk more about this, but for now, let me pause so that my colleagues can take over. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chiji. That was very engaged and engaging, very animated. So thank you, quite interesting. The next speaker is Fatou Bamba. She's Nyane's compatriot and a professor of history at Julius Nyerere University in Kankan, Guinea. I did not know anything about her until we started planning this event, and was actually through recommendation that I was able to contact her. But when I looked her up, Google presented me with two high-ranking government ministers in Ivory Coast. But I was actually looking for a scholar, and I've been very astonished by her work, which is grounded the knowledge of Nyane's place in the historical, cultural, and educational context in post-independence Guinea. She'll be speaking about this topic, and the title is Nyane as a man at the center of the valuation of Mandingo history, literary culture, and education in Guinea. She'll be speaking in French, and our colleague, Professor Mohamed Kamara, will translate instead. So, Fatou, it's your turn.
C'est bon, Aku punya reactive mradi. Son est là. Il faut activer la vidéo aussi. Non, ils ont demandé le son d'abord. Où c'est? Pourquoi mec? À désactiver ça. Celui, mais comment la faut qu'à oui. Ok. Et la vidéo. Mets la vidéo. Ok.
C'est pas la parole.
C'est pas.
Oui, vas-y.
Ok, merci. Merci de m'avoir passé la parole. C'est avec un grand plaisir que je prends part à cette conférence dédiée au célèbre historien et écrivain guinéen Djibril Tansmi Niane, que Dieu a rappelé le 8 mars 2021. Que son âme repose en paix. Ma communication portera sur le thème Djibril Tansmi Niane, l'homme au centre de la valorisation de l'histoire mandingue, de la culture littéraire et de l'éducation nationale en Guinée. Et sur ce, cette communication va s'articuler autour de 6 points. Premièrement, nous allons parler de la naissance de Julius disparu, le professeur Djibril Tansmi Niane, de sa petite enfance, l'origine de son attachement à la tradition mandingue. Djibril Tansmi Niane, l'homme historien des lettres pour la valorisation des traditions orales. Nous parlerons également de l'impact de son ouvrage L'épopée du mandingue dans le milieu culturel guinéen. Et enfin, on parlera de Djibril Tansmi Niane, l'homme de la culture profondément attaché aux valeurs sociales. Et pour ça, en parlant toujours de Djibril Tansmi Niane, nous ne pouvons pas parler de lui sans parler de la naissance de l'homme. Djibril Tansmi Niane est né le 9 janvier 1932 à Conakry. Son père, Daouda Niane, tout couleur d'origine sénégalaise, était un ouvrier au chemin de fer de Conakry pendant l'administration coloniale. Et sa mère s'appelait Aïssata Sam, qui venait de Yukungun, au nord-ouest du Fouta Djallon, en République de Guinée.
OK, merci. Je vais traduire cette partie et puis paragraphe par paragraphe, d'accord?
Oui.
Okay, so thank you first of all for allowing me to be part of this panel to talk about the great Djibril Tansmi Niane, the central figure that he is in the annals of cultural and historical studies of Guinea. My presentation will be divided into 6 separate parts, which will recount the life and career of Djibril Tansmi Niane. Djibril Tansmi Niane was born on the 9th January 1932 in Conakry. His father, Daouda Niane, who is Al Pula or Tukulur of Senegalese origin, was a railway worker in Guinea during the colonial period. His mother, Aïssata Sam, came from Yunkundum in the northwest region of Fouta Djallon in the Republic of Guinea.
Merci. Et on ne peut pas parler de l'homme aussi sans faire allusion à sa petite enfance. Djibril Tansmi Niane fut éduqué par sa grande sœur Fatou Niane dans la famille de son beau-frère Mamadi Sissé. Ce dernier instituteur à Kishidougou, à Farana, Sigiri, à Kankan et à Baro suivi le parcours du fonctionnaire de brousse en pays mandingue, ce qui a permis à Djibril Tansmi d'apprécier les récits et l'ambiance des griots dans la demeure de celui-ci lors des jeux au clair de lune dans le village de Baro.
Merci.
Vous savez, à l'époque, dans le mandingue, tout le monde se réunissait au clair de lune à la place du village, la place publique. Et de là, on profitait pour écouter le récit des griots à travers des légendes, à travers des contes et des devinettes. Et ça, c'était une pratique qui contribuait beaucoup à l'éducation des enfants pour pouvoir avoir une certaine sagesse pour affronter la vie pratique. Donc,
merci. Well, so Djibril Tansmi Niane was educated by his older sister, Fatou Niane, within the family of his older sister, and who was married to Mamadi Cissé. So Mamadi Cissé, who was a teacher at Kisidugu in Farana and Sigiri, and then later on in Kankan and Baro, was a rural functionary, a civil servant in the administration. So this allowed Jibril Tamsir Niane to come in contact with accounts given by griots within the compound of the family, but it's also exposed him to games and activities that were performed in the village of Baro in the broad moonlight. From Baro, he went on to Conakry to go to middle school, and he was able to reconnect with his other sisters, including his twin sister, Yaye, and his younger sister, but also his paternal uncle, after whom he was named. In fact, it was this uncle who, according to reports, was responsible for Jibril Tamsir Niane's departure from Senegal to Guinea.
Merci. Et après sa petite enfance, voilà, nous parlons de pourquoi l'homme s'est attaché à la tradition mandingue. Son admiration pour la culture mandingue a été forgée par son vécu dans le pays mandingue au cours de sa petite enfance et de son adolescence dans la localité de Baro. Baro est un village situé dans la préfecture de Kouroussa, à l'ouest de la métropole de Kankan.
Merci.
En effet, Jibril Tamsir Niane a vécu toutes les facettes de la culture mandingue, dont, entre autres, les contes, les danses, comme je vous disais tantôt, les travaux champêtres, la chasse et la surveillance des bœufs. Donc, il a participé à toutes ces pratiques mandingues-là, ce qui a beaucoup plus forgé son attachement à la culture et à la tradition orale, surtout au récit des griots.
Okay. So Jibril Tamsir Niane's admiration and love for Manding culture was shaped by his residence in the Manding country, Lopé Manding, during his childhood and during his adolescence as well, especially in the village of Baro, which is situated in Kouroussa Prefecture, west of the city of Kankan. In fact, Jibril Tamsir Niane was who experienced, of course, a lot of different aspects of Manding culture, including folk tales, including dance that were performed during the moonlight activities, but also his participation in field activities such as farm work, in hunting, in cattle herding as well. So all of these activities brought Jibril Tamsir Niane in close contact with Manding culture and the oral tradition, especially the stories recounted by griots.
Ses premiers contacts avec les griots sont partis de sa rencontre avec Fatoumata Babou numéro 1, ami de son beau-frère Mamadi Cissé dans le village de Fatoumata, situé à peine 2 km de Baro, un village griot reconnu du Manding, et ses premières inspirations de l'histoire mandingue sont parties de la richesse du récit relaté par ces derniers.
So his first, Jibril Tamsir Niane's first contact with the griot took place when he came in contact with Fatoumata Babou, number 1, who was a friend of Tamsir Niane's brother-in-law, Mamadi Cissé, who lived in the village of Fatoumata, which is situated roughly 1.5 miles from Baro. And so the village griot, who is well known within the Manding culture, that is Fatoumata Babou. So his very first inspirations regarding the history of Manding peoples and culture took place within this rich context of storytelling.
Les griots, depuis le temps des grands royaumes et empires, ont servi à retracer les hauts faits des grands hommes qui ont marqué leur histoire et des grands événements historiques. Ils sont la mémoire vivante du Manding, les maîtres de la parole, les conseillers des souverains, des médiateurs entre les parties en conflit.
Merci. So griots, from time immemorial, especially during the times of the great empires and kingdoms, have served in the interest, if you will, of retelling the exploits of great men, men who marked their time and their own time, and of course the great events in history. Griots in general are the living memory of the Manding. They are the masters of the word, they are advisors to kings, but they are also mediators during times of conflict.
Djibril Tamsir Niane, un homme de culture et de lettres, a toujours eu pour cette classe sociale un profond attachement et n'a jamais manqué l'occasion pour magnifier les récits historiques et éducatifs détenus par eux dans le Manding.
Djibril Tamsir Niane, this great man of culture and letters, has always had a special affection for this particular class of Africans and a very deep connection to the work that they do regarding especially, so he missed no opportunity whatsoever to glorify the work of the griot within the context of history and education writ large regarding the Manding culture and peoples.
Quatrièmement, nous parlerons d'un grand historien et d'un homme de lettres pour la valorisation de la tradition orale.
So we'll move now to the next topic where we'll talk about the man as a man of letters, but also as the great promoter of the oral tradition.
Djibril Tamsir Niane était un médiéviste. Il s'est intéressé à l'histoire du monde médiéval ouest-africain lors de la préparation de son DS. Et malgré les mises en garde de son consultant sur l'insuffisance des références bibliographiques sur ce thème à l'époque, mais fort de ses connaissances scientifiques et de ses convictions en faveur de la valorisation de la tradition orale africaine, il s'est donné le défi d'écrire l'histoire des grands empires ouest-africains, en particulier celle de l'Empire du Mali.
Merci. So Djibril Tamsir Niane, a medievalist by profession, got interested in the history of the medieval world regarding West Africa during his studies, his postgraduate studies. And his interest developed in spite of the warnings from his advisor that he would face difficulties in finding materials, bibliographic materials with regards to that particular period. But of course, Djibril Tamsir Niane, who was bent on conducting his research and who was well-grounded in his knowledge of the Manding people at that particular point, was pushed by his belief in the need to promote the oral tradition, the African oral tradition. So he took it upon himself to conduct his research regarding, regardless of the warnings from his advisors, to conduct his research on the great empires, West African empires, but in particular, the Empire of Mali.
Il va entreprendre une tournée dans les contrées griotiques de la Guinée et du Mali, et aussi auprès des sages et griots isolés, en vue de recueillir les témoignages utiles et nécessaires à la reconstruction des données historiques de cette partie de l'Afrique.
So he decided after this to go on a tour of the griotic regions of Guinea and Mali. And he also encountered or proposed to encounter sages and griots who were in isolated parts of Mali and Guinea. And of course, his goal was to collect the accounts and the statements from these people that were necessary for his work in reconstituting the history of this part of Africa.
C'est d'ailleurs cette tournée qui va le conduire tour à tour à Kela, en République du Mali, à Fadama, à Niagasola et Djelibakoro, en République de Guinée. De cette tournée, Djibril Tansmi retiendra un souvenir mémorable de celle de Djelibakoro, où il a fait la rencontre de son principal et informateur le plus dévoué et disponible, Djeli Mamadou Kouyaté, à qui il a attribué la paternité de son célèbre best-seller, Sundiata ou l'épopée du Mandingue.
Merci. So this tour will take him alternately to such places as Fadama, Niagasolo, Djelibakoro, but of course also Kela in the Republic of Mali. The other towns, Fadama, Niagasolo, Djelibakoro, are located in the Republic of Guinea. And during his tour, Djibril Tamsir Niane will particularly remember the time he spent in Djelibakoro, where he met his principal informant and the man who will go on to be his greatest resource in terms of his work. And this person, in the name of Djeli Mamadou Kouyaté, according to Djibril Tamsir Niane, who is actually the real author of what will become his bestseller, Sundiata, an epic of old Mali.
Selon les témoignages d'Elhadji Fodé Kouyaté, ingénieur agronome à la retraite à Kissidougou et neveu de Djeli Mamadou Kouyaté, il nous dit de tous les récits historiques relatés dans sa recherche, Djibril Tansmi Niane a retenu celui de Djeli Mamadou Kouyaté parce qu'il était le plus précis et le plus cohérent. Les mêmes propos ont été confirmés par Koudamoudou Keita, professeur de philosophie et d'histoire à la retraite à Djelibakoro, ainsi que par Djibril Tansmi Niane lui-même lors de ses interviews accordées à certains médias nationaux et internationaux.
Merci. So according to retired agricultural engineer Fodé Kouyaté, the reason Djibril Tansir Niane remembered his encounter with Djeli Mamadou Kouyaté is, according to him, the account presented by Djeli Mamadou Kouyaté compared to other accounts was the most precise and the most coherent. And this particular account itself, this statement by Fodé Kouyaté was also confirmed by Koudamoudou Keita, who is a retired professor of history and living in Djelibakoro. But it was also equally confirmed by Djibril Tansir Niane himself during many interviews he gave to national and international media reporters.
Ainsi, après les travaux de son mémoire, vu l'intérêt suscité par le récit et à la demande de l'intéressé, Alioune Diop, directeur de publication de la maison d'édition Présence africaine Paris, publia Sundiata ou l'épopée du Mandingue en 1960.
So given the interest that Djibril Tansir Niane's work had ignited in people, but also based upon the efforts and demands of Djibril Tansir Niane himself, Eileen Julien, who was at that time director of publication at the publishing house, famously known as Présence Africaine, the decision was made to publish Sundiata ou l'épopée du Mandingue, Sundiata, an epic of old Mali in 1960.
Toujours dans ce souci de redorer l'image des traditions orales africaines et de sortir de l'ombre l'histoire du continent noir, Djibril Tansir Niane va travailler au sein d'une équipe d'historiens anthropologues, d'archéologues africains, Joseph Kizerbo, Cheikh Anta Diop du Sénégal, aux travaux de recherche sur l'histoire générale de l'Afrique en 1975. Les résultats de ces recherches seront publiés en 1992 sous le nom de l'histoire générale de l'Afrique.
Merci. So always, Djibril Tansir Niane, always of course still interested in the valorization of African oral traditions and in the resuscitation of African history from the buried past, he decided to join a team of African historians, anthropologists, archaeologists, such as Joseph Kizerbo, Cheikh Anta Diop, to conduct research on a general history of Africa starting in 1975. So the results, of course, of their research will later be published in 1992 under the title General History of Africa.
Et en cinquième partie plutôt, qu'est-ce que l'épopée du Manding ou quel est l'impact de l'épopée du Manding dans le milieu culturel guinéen?
So what is the specific impact of the Manding epic within the cultural space of Guinea?
Cet ouvrage a restauré l'image des traditions orales africaines, mis en valeur la prestance des griots dans l'art de la parole. Eux qui avaient souvent de mauvaises réputations, traités de commandeurs dans les cérémonies de baptême, de mariage, etc. Car les colons les avaient pris pour des petits gens. Ainsi, Sundiata ou l'épopée Manding a valorisé et donné du crédit à la parole des griots, montré la profondeur de leur science, car les griots détiennent l'héritage du passé. Donc, c'est eux qui peuvent régler les conflits actuels dont certaines origines remontent dans le passé.
Merci. So this particular work, Sundiata, an epic of Old Mali, rehabilitated the image of oral traditions. It also highlighted the significant role of the griot in the reconstitution of African history, but also the significant role of the griot within the context of the oral tradition generally. So the griots, of course, have over the years been the victims of a particularly bad reputation because they were considered to be just simple beggars during ceremonies such as baptisms and marriages. And of course, not to forget that the colonizer regarded the griot as an insignificant figure. So the epic of Sundiata, the Manding epic of Sundiata, has restored credibility to the oral tradition, to the role of the griot, and it has also demonstrated the depth of their knowledge and their place within knowledge creation. So generally, griots are the owners of the heritage of the past. They are the keepers of the past. And because of their knowledge of the past, they occupy a privileged position in the resolution of conflicts, especially conflicts that have their origins in the past.
À l'époque des grands empires et des royaumes, c'est le griot qui faisait le roi. C'est lui qui le faisait exister à travers des conseils, des louanges et des médiations.
So during the times of the great empires and the great kingdoms, kings were actually made by griots. Why? It is the griot, because of the advice, because of counsel that they provided to the king, because of their praise songs and praise activities, and because of their mediation, it can be seen that without the griot, there will not be kings.
Par exemple, à cause de l'importance et l'utilité des griots, Sundiata Keita a lutté contre Soumaoro Kanté pour récupérer son griot Bala Fasake qui était pris en otage par ces derniers pour lui rendre service.
So to demonstrate the value of the griot for the king and the fact that there is no king without a griot, probably the greatest motivation for Sundiata's wars against Soumaoro Keita was the kidnapping of Bala Faseke by Soumanguru Kante, and Bala Faseke was Sundiata's griot. So, the real casus belli for Sundiata's war against Soumaoro was the recuperation of his griot.
Aujourd'hui, Sundiata ou l'épopée du Manding est devenu un ouvrage classique enseigné dans les écoles partout en Afrique de l'Ouest. Aux États-Unis également, il est enseigné en introduction à l'histoire de l'Afrique.
So today, of course, the great epic of Sundiata of the Manding has become a classic, which is taught in schools all over Africa and West Africa in particular. And of course, in the United States, it is also used as an introductory text to the history of Africa.
Après Sundiata, il y a eu la relance de la tradition orale et la course vers les griots et des anciens issus de la notabilité. La tradition orale a été magnifiée et valorisée.
So thanks to Niane's epic, we have seen a revival of an interest in the oral tradition. And of course, we have also seen the move by so many to capture the value of the griot in terms of the awards before they pass away. But also we have seen a revival of the interest in antiquities related to the Manding kingdoms. So in this way, we've seen the promotion of the oral tradition more generally.
Cinquièmement, Djibril Tansmi Niane a été un grand acteur dans l'émancipation de l'éducation guinéenne.
So Djibril Tansmi Niane, the next point of my presentation will be on Djibril Tansmi Niane as a great liberator of Guinean education.
Djibril Tansmi Niane fut l'un des premiers enseignants en République de Guinée après son indépendance en 1958, en compagnie des panafricanistes comme Joseph Kizerbo de Burkina Faso, le physicien Abdou Moumouni du Niger, le poète sénégalais David Diop pour accompagner le jeune État guinéen à son indépendance.
Merci. So Djibril Tansmi Niane is one of the first teachers in the Republic of Guinea just after Guinea got its independence in 1958. And in his work, of course, he was accompanied by other Africans, Pan-Africanists, such as Joseph Kizerbo of Burkina Faso, and the physicist Abdou Moumouni from Niger, and also the Senegalese poet David Diop. And all of them contributed, of course, in pushing Guinea forward after independence.
Grâce à sa participation active à la rédaction du volume 4 de l'histoire générale de l'Afrique, allant de la période du XIIe au XVIe siècle sous les grands empires et royaumes de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, Djibril Tansmi Niane est considéré comme l'un des spécialistes de l'histoire de l'Afrique occidentale.
So thanks to his contribution, his active participation in the publication of Volume 4 of a General History of Africa that focused on the period from the 12th century to the 16th century, during which we find the great empires and kingdoms of West Africa. Djibril Tansmi Niane is considered one of the great specialists of West African history.
Les manuels d'histoire-géographie enseignés dans les écoles guinéennes niveau élémentaire sont des récits, des écrits plutôt de Djibril Tansmi Niane depuis la Première République.
So the textbooks that are used to teach generally history and geography in Guinean schools at the primary school level, the text of Djibril Tansmi Niane occupy a primary position.
Djibril Tansmi Niane a écrit plusieurs ouvrages et des récits de contes africains, ainsi que des manuels d'instruction civique et morale.
So Djibril Tansmi Niane is the author of many books that recount African cultures and traditions. And so folk tales, but also textbooks that are focused specifically on civic and moral education.
Grâce à son implication effective dans le système éducatif guinéen, il est admis au bureau des syndicats en novembre 1961, fut la grève des enseignants qui réclamait la revalorisation de la fonction enseignante. Les responsables des enseignants furent arrêtés et certains condamnés à mort, y compris Djibril Tansmi Niane, qui a purgé 3 ans de prison ferme au Kambouaro.
So on account of his involvement, his active involvement in the educational system in Guinea, Djibril Tansmi Niane became an important figure, an officer in the syndicalist movement in Guinea. In November 1961, during a strike by teachers who demanded specific recognition of their work of the teaching profession, the organizers of the strike were arrested, and many of them were sentenced. Some of them were sentenced to death, including Djibril Tansmi Niane, who spent 3 years in prison in the famous Kambouaro, or the infamous Kambouaro.
Après sa libération effective, après sa libération en 1963, il va enseigner l'histoire du Moyen-Âge africain à l'université Gamal Abdel Nasser de Conakry jusqu'en 1972, lorsqu'il a demandé une bourse sanitaire pendant les vacances pour la Roumanie. Et après ses soins médicaux, il s'est exilé au Sénégal, où il a travaillé dans l'administration sénégalaise aux côtés du président Léopold Sédar Senghor.
So after he was freed from prison in 1963, Djibril Tansmi Niane will go on to teach history of the Middle Ages, of the African Middle Ages at the University Gamal Abdel Nasser in Conakry, all the way until 1972. And after which, immediately after which, he asked for permission. He asked for sick leave and then went to Romania to take care of himself. At the end of his time in Romania, medical attention, he went straight to Guinea, where he lived in exile and worked in the administration of President Léopold Sédar Senghor.
Enfin, il a été le tout premier Guinéen à créer une maison d'édition appelée SAEC en 1992 à son retour de l'exil. Avant sa mort, il avait créé la première bibliothèque privée en République de Guinée avec l'aide financière de l'UNESCO et celui du président de la République de Guinée.
So Djibril Tansmi Niane was the very first Guinean to found a publishing house in Guinea in 1992 after his return from exile to Guinea from Senegal. Before his death, he had founded the very first private library in the Republic of Guinea, thanks to the efforts and the contributions, financial contributions of UNESCO and the President of the Republic of Guinea.
Grâce à son appui relationnel, ainsi que le nom d'autres grands écrivains guinéens comme Camara Laye, Kerno Monenembo, Alioune Fantouré, la Guinée a été désignée, la capitale guinéenne a été désignée en 2018 comme Conakry, capitale mondiale du livre par l'UNESCO.
Merci. So, thanks to his many connections, but also to the efforts of such great Guinean writers like Camara Laye, Cherno Monenembo Diallo, Alioune Fantouré, the Guinean capital, Conakry, was designated in 2018 as the world capital of the book by UNESCO.
Enfin, on parlera de l'homme. Djibril Tansmi Niane, un homme de culture profondément attaché aux valeurs sociales.
So finally, we'll talk about Djibril Tansmi Niane, the great man of culture who is well connected to the social values of his people.
Djibril Tansmi Niane, sa vie durant est restée reconnaissant et attaché à la localité de Baro, où il a vécu une bonne partie de son enfance. Pour cette proximité et cette reconnaissance constante de l'homme aux populations de Baro, ainsi que pour son brillant parcours scientifique, celles-ci, pour lui rendre honneur, vont donner son nom au collège de la sous-préfecture, dans la même lancée, un domaine pour la construction de sa résidence privée qui lui sera octroyée.
Merci. So his entire life, Djibril Tansmi Niane remained grateful and attached to the village of Baro, where he spent a good portion of his childhood. So because of his closeness to this community and his continued connection to it and gratefulness to the community for what it did for him during his childhood, the community decided to name a middle school that was founded in the sub-prefecture after Jibril Tamsi Niane himself. Also, a plot of land was provided by the community for the construction of the private residence of Jibril Tamsi Niane.
Selon les témoignages de son neveu Oumar Sissé et du censeur de l'établissement, à l'inauguration du collège de Baro, Jibril Tamsi Niane a fait un don d'1 tonne de livres à la bibliothèque.
According to reports by his nephew, Oumar Sissé, and by the deputy principal of the school, during the opening of the school, the inauguration of the school of Baro, Jibril Tamsi Niane donated a ton of books to the library.
Parce que dans ces villages, l'accès au support didactique par les apprenants et les formateurs n'est pas évident. Ces gestes de Jibril Tamsi Niane prouvent que l'homme a toujours été animé par une ferme volonté de soutenir les efforts d'apprentissage des élèves en République de Guinée en général, dans son village adoptif Baro en particulier.
So in a village where teaching and learning resources are scarce, so this particular action by Jibril Tamsi Niane, that is the donation of these many books to the community's library, demonstrate that Jibril Tamsi Niane has always been guided by his great desire to support efforts in the formation, in the teaching of the children of the Republic of Guinea in general, but of this particular village of Baro.
Jibril Tamsi Niane a également soutenu la communauté de Baro dans son souci de sauvegarder ou de la survie de la célèbre mare de Bolé, la mare de Baro, à travers des campagnes de reboisement dans les alentours de la mare, l'empoisonnement de celle-ci et la réalisation d'un canal en vue de la relier au fleuve.
So Jibril Tamsi Niane was equally desirous of supporting the community of Baro in its efforts to preserve the famous pond of Bolé, which is the pond of Baro. Throughout the region, of course, there are these ponds located, but he also contributed to efforts to reintroduce the lost forest of the region, but also to the reintroduction of fish within the pond itself.
Conscient que les mares en Haute-Guinée ont un caractère sacré, une valeur traditionnelle, culturelle, religieuse et ancestrale depuis l'installation des communautés, Jibril Tamsi Niane, un véritable homme de culture enraciné aux valeurs traditionnelles mandingues, a très tôt compris la nécessité de venir au secours de l'une des plus célèbres mares de la Guinée.
So in addition to his work in the reforestation, in the reintroduction of fish in the pond, but also in the creation of a canal that will connect the pond to the great river, Jibril Tamsi Niane was also conscious of the sacredness in general, the sacredness of ponds in Upper Guinea, as well as their traditional, their cultural, religious, and ancestral significance within the larger community of the Guinean territory. So Jibril Tamsi Niane, who was, of course, a true man of culture and grounded within and in the tradition of his people, understood early on the need to help preserve these famous ponds of Mali.
Par ailleurs, lors des cérémonies de pêche, il faut signaler que celles-ci sont annuelles. Les pêches des mares se font une fois par an. Djibril Tansmi Nyane, quand il se trouvait au pays, mobilisait sa famille ainsi que certains de ses amis diplomates accrédités en République de Guinée en vue de prendre part à cette grande fête à caractère culturel et religieux.
So furthermore, during the annual fishing ceremonies organized in the region, Djibril Tamsi Nyane, whenever he was around, he was present, he would bring his entire family together and a group of friends and diplomats, foreign diplomats that were working in Guinea, and would lead them in joining the people in their efforts to preserve these resources that had religious and cultural value.
Toujours d'après un témoignage recueilli auprès de son neveu Oumar Sissé Abaro, Djibril Tansmi, au-delà de ses passions pour l'histoire et la littérature, aimait jouer de la musique avec ses amis Batouba Kondé, Sakoba Kondé, qui ont rejoint aujourd'hui le royaume des cieux.
So, and again, according to reports collected from his nephew, Oumar Sissé, in Baro, Djibril Tamsi Nyane, beyond his passion for history and literature, also loved playing music with his friends Batouba Kondé and Sakoda Kondé, who will join him, who have also passed away, who have also joined Djibril Tamsi Nyane in the land of the ancestors.
Et pour terminer, il faut retenir que Djibril Tansmi Nyane a été un homme très humble et reconnaissant envers les uns et les autres. Selon les témoignages des différents personnages qui ont connu et côtoyé l'homme.
So in conclusion, we must remember that Djibril Tamsi Nyane has been, speaking of him in the present, a very humble man who was always connected and grateful to those people that he came in contact with, as the many different accounts from people who met him attest.
All right, well, thank you, Maxi, to both Fatou and Mohammed for this. This is actually why we need people who know something to step in at the right time. So it's incredibly enriching to have Fatou give us very well-grounded information about Djibril Tamsi Nyane. Thanks so much. Our next speaker is Lucy Durán, who is a professor of music at SOAS at the University of London, where she specializes in the music of Mali and Cuba. She joined SOAS in 1993, teaching courses on West African music and also the Kora. From 2000 to 2013, she presented the BBC program World Roots, making on-location features about traditional music in many countries, including Madagascar, China, that's in Georgia, Bolivia, and Cuba. Much of her work is practice-based research leading to albums and films. Her most recent film, Tegere Toulon, Hand-Clapping Songs of Mali, is a unique portrayal of the vibrant tradition of girls' hand-clapping songs filmed on location in Mali in 2018 and co-authored with Malian filmmaker Mustafa Diallo. It was commissioned by the Kronos Quartet and was screened as part of their concert for Carnegie Hall's Voices of Hope this past April 24. She's going to talk about the music of Sunjata epic and the Kela tradition, which Niane discusses in his work, and she's going to play music with us. Thank you. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be part of this wonderful panel, and I was so enthralled with Fatoumata's marvelous description of the biography, the life of the great Djibril Tamsi Nyane, who we are paying tribute to today. I would like to share screen and share a PowerPoint that I prepared. I hope you will bear with me on this. What I want to do is to talk a little bit about the music, because the griot, or the jelly, to use their own term, is not just a speaking document. The jelly is also a singing document. So I think it's important to remember the musical side of the Sunjata story, the epic recitation of Sunjata that eventually ended up in this marvelous book by our focus today, D.T. Niane. This is a photograph of Kela that I took in 1990, around 1990. So what I want to do is to focus a little bit in particular on Kela and on the music, not just the music of Sunjata, but the music that surrounds Sunjata and that is performed by the Jalis, the Mande griots of Kela in particular. So I'm going to start with playing a song which actually has nothing specifically to do with Sunjata, but it has a lot to do with the great musical art of the griots of Kela, and you'll see why I'm looking at Kela in a moment. This shows you the side of the Jalis in the way that they, as Fatoumata was saying, in the way that they are not just narrators and the memories of past events, but they are also counselors. And counseling is an extremely important part of the art of the Jeli. And so I would like to play just a little bit of this song, Nyamalo, which features the great late singer Kassamadi Jabate. More about him in a minute. But I think it's very timely. It's a very broad song and a very beautiful song, which I recorded for an album that I made of Kassamadi Jabate, actually in Kela, using a mobile studio and using local musicians. And so you will see in this song that it's very, very connected to the old Kerala tradition of music, but also it has a message that's extremely relevant right now. Be cautious. Let us be cautious. Let everyone be cautious. The world has arrived at a stage where we need to be very careful. Whatever you do in this world, you need to think about your final day. If the world has reached a moment where we need to be cautious, leaders of the people, you need to be cautious. Heads of state, you need to be cautious. Whatever you do in this world, you need to think about your final day. Well, I had the great fortune to meet Jibril Tamsir Niane in 2005 when the Mande Studies Conference took place in Kankan, where Fatoumata has just been speaking to us from. And I wanted to share this wonderful photo by Barbara Frank, one of our colleagues in the Mande Studies Association. Here we see Niane, and here we see David Conrad, both great scholars of the oral tradition, both who have done books on Sunjata. More of them in a minute, but I love this photo. I took this, I found this photo on the internet, and so here's a young student, obviously studying Nyane's book, Sunjata, an Epic of Old Mali, and he's sitting on the underground somewhere. I wonder if anybody knows who took this photo. It's a marvelous photo. It speaks volumes. So yeah, let's move on to this. So here is the cover, one of the covers of this often published book by Nyane, Sunjata, an Epic of Old Mali. And here is the cover of David Conrad's text, which is a line-by-line transcription of a recitation. We heard about some of this in Chiji's a wonderful presentation at the beginning of this session. So whereas Nyane's book, as you know, is a prose rendition based on the testimony of Mamadou Kouyaté from Djeli-Bakoro, whereas Conrad's book is a line-by-line transcription of an actual rendition over several days by two great musicians also from Guinea. But I wanted to point out that, we read about this, we read about it, and it's in, it's text in a book, but actually both of these will have been performed originally with musical accompaniment and some singing. So it's important to know about the musical side of this whole tradition of the recitation of the story of Sunjata. So if you look at the book, Sunjata, an Epic of Old Mali, you will find, if you read it, you will find lots of very vivid imagery, which is just so much the imagery of the Mande Djelis, how they speak. It's also, of course, in Nyane's own voice. But things like the bright country, this is a photo I took in the late 1980s, just outside Kela, in fact. And to me, it just symbolizes exactly the bright country of the savannah. Just a little map to show you where we are. So here is the Niger River. This is, of course, just the border between Guinea and Mali. It was, at the time of Sunjata, obviously there were no borders. And this was pretty much the center from which he ruled. So it's just down here, very near the border with Guinea, Kangaba. We need to know about Kangaba. But so one of the things that Djeli Mamadou Kouyaté from Djeli-Bakoro says, he says, at Kela, the village of the great masters, I learnt the origins of Mali and the art of speaking. I took an oath to teach only what is to be taught and conceal what is to be kept concealed. So Djeli Mamadou Kouyaté acknowledges the importance of Kela as a source of knowledge, and of course so does Nyane. So here is Kangaba, where Sunjata Keita's sacred hut is located, and here it is. And here is Kasamadi standing in front of it. This dates back, this photograph that I took after many years of asking for permission to be able to take a picture of the sacred hut. I was finally given permission in around 2005, I think. And so this is a sacred hut, or the Kama Bulong. Lots has been written about that. And the full recitation of the Sunjata narrative is done when the Kama Bulong has its thatch renewed every 7 years in principle. That's a whole other story, much written about. So here is the Jebate family of Kela, and they are the ones who are responsible for performing the Sunjata epic in the Kama Bulong. So they are the custodians, really, of the Sunjata epic. at least in Mali. I won't read through all of this, but here is Yamuru Djebate, an important person in the memory of the Sunjata epic, and Siramori Djebate, who was one of the greatest female composers of Mali in the 20th century. And we'll see about her in a minute. So Yamuru Djebate, who we saw in the previous, so we saw here wearing the cap, he is in fact the one who is asked to recite the story of Sunjata in a spoken voice, but with the women, the female chorus behind him singing in the Anthology of Malian Music back in 1970. I'll just give you a tiny taste of that. So that is the one of the actual songs that accompanies the recitation of the story of Sunjata. It's probably the best known of those songs. And the fact that the National Ensemble asked Yamuru Djebate to recite that is very significative of the importance of Kela. And the Djebate Jellies of Kela as the custodians of the Sunjata song. So here is another one of the great reciters, one of the great experts from Kela in the story of Sunjata, El Hajj Kela Balaba Djebate. Here you see him with the silver staff, and he is was the patriarch of the Djebates of Kela, and a very committed to the tradition and to making sure that the tradition was kept absolutely as he had learnt himself about it. It's also important, I think, to remember that women embellish the recitation of Sunjata because it's the men who have the authority to recite, but women play a very important part. As you've heard in both in the piece that we just heard before with the National Ensemble, the women sing the choruses and they do a lot of other sung interventions. That was Kela as well. Those are the women of Kela. All these photos are mine. So I came across Kela first in 1989. I was advisor and researcher for a BBC documentary film, which was called Under African Skies. There were 5 films made, and this one was focusing on Mali. And that was when I was introduced to Kela and to the remarkable tradition of the Kela Djebate family, including Kassamadi Djebate, who we see here. So here is Kassamadi Djebate, who we saw earlier on standing in front of the Sunjata sacred hut. So Kassamadi, steeped in the tradition, was recruited in the early 1970s by Mali's orchestra, the National Badema, as the voice of cultural authenticity. This band, the National Badema, had previously been called Los Maravillas, or Las Maravillas de Mali, and they had been trained in conservatoires in Cuba. And when they returned to Mali, they needed to change their name. They were required to change their name and to become more culturally authentic. And it was Kassamadi who was called on to bring in that voice. At this same conference in Kankan with the marvelous Niane, who I have to say it was such an honor to meet him, and he's indeed was such a humble person and with a wonderful sense of humor, and someone who indeed clearly loved music and was delighted to see Kassamadi. I'm sorry. So here we see Kassamadi in the middle with the glasses, and here had given a music performance, and Niane was so cordial and happy to see him. So here is Kassamadi, paix à son âme. He passed away in 2018. And here is his daughter, Awa Kassamadi, and here is his granddaughter, Rokia Kouyaté. Rokia's father is there, Demba Kouyaté. So the lineage of Kella, the Kella Jabates, continues. Let us listen just briefly to a song that, another one of the songs that I recorded in 2002 in Kella on the mobile studio. And so although this is not about Sunjata, but it is about the Keita lineage and about a neighborhood quarrel between two of the neighborhoods in Kangaba, where Sunjata Keita's sacred hut is, and the Kaba neighborhood and the Figira neighborhood. And so and Kassamadi's daughter, Awa Kassamadi, follows in his footsteps. She is a singer that I've also worked a lot with. She is part of Trio Dakali, and I wanted to share with you this version of one of the Sunjata songs, which Trio Dakali perform with Kronos Quartet, just to go quickly through these wonderful lyrics, which actually we heard earlier on. We heard them being sung. He took up his bow, Sogolon. Sogolon was for the mother, the name of the mother. He took up his bow and walked. He took the bow, the great serpent who encircles the town, the great serpent who encircles the whole world. Some mothers give birth to a scrawny owl, but Jata's mother gave birth to gold, red gold. What makes me happy to live in the big town? The great festivities of the jellies. If 10 people won't talk to you in town, another 10 will smile at you. Great festivities of the griots. We'll just have a little taste of that. So this is Trio Dakali with the Kronos Quartet, who are a celebrated string quartet from San Francisco. So a recreation of, we don't have time for that. I'm just going to wind up now, and I wanted to finish with this lovely quote from Sunjata, An Epic of Old Mali. We griots are depositories of the knowledge of the past, but whoever knows the history of a country can read its future. Other peoples use writing to record the past, but this invention has killed the faculty of memory among them. They do not feel the past anymore, for writing lacks the warmth of the human voice. With them, everybody thinks he knows, whereas learning should be a secret. The prophets did not write, and their words have all been the more vivid as a result. What paltry learning is that which is congealed in dumb books? That's a quote from Jeli Mamadou Kouyaté. And it's interesting that that comes in a book. In fact, he's almost arguing against his own profession as a writer. So I wanted just to pay tribute to Djibril Tamsir Niane, and show my gratitude for having met him and for having shared the wonderful tradition of Kella, the wonderful musical tradition of Kella, which lives on, as indeed does the legacy of Djibril Tamsir Niane. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. This is really very interesting and revealing. Unfortunately, for some reason, the audios weren't transferring to YouTube. So if possible, we'll actually might be able to maybe embed some of these files in the comment section so that those who view the video later can actually take a look and listen to the song, beautiful songs. So thank you. We'll have a last speaker. That's Eileen Julien, who is professor of comparative literature, French and Italian and African studies at Indiana University, where she recently was director of the Institute for Advanced Study. She's the author of the famous African Literature and the Questions of Orality, the memoir Travels with May, and co-editor of The Locations and Dislocations of African Literature. Her latest book, a collaborative compendium titled Literature, A World History, is currently in production with Blackwell. Her paper is titled The Call of the Epic, Then and Now, and it examines some of the debates around the status of the epic in African literature. But equally important, how scholarly assessment of the genre have changed in the course of the literary history that has remained very vibrant. So thank you very much, Eileen, and it's your turn. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, here I am. Thank you so much, Akin. And just to say that it is, first of all, really an honor to participate in this panel, in this discussion of D.T. Niane, whom I've known in books since the 1970s when I was a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin, and Idris Makward was my professor there. And of course, this panel is so rich, and I'm very moved by the music that we just heard and Lucy Duran's experience of working with and filming, and her deep, obvious love for this music and the work of the griots and of Niane. I hope that everyone, can you hear me and am I visible? Just to know. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, I couldn't tell. My presentation is actually focused on questions of time and then and now. I've just called it the call of the epic, then and now. And so I want to, first of all, talk about what I see as two issues related to the time of the epic, when it was composed, and how we define epic, and then also what do we do today with the epic as far as literary history goes. That's sort of my interest in what I hope to present. So I just want to say that I've been teaching for a very long time, and this epic is something I teach often. I've taught it on many campuses, and I've enjoyed it. And when I come back to it frequently, I am both, I enjoy it again, partly because I know it so well, and partly because I'm always wondering, what am I going to see this time that I didn't see the last time? So there are really just 4 points that I hope to make. The first point has to do with what I call then, the call of the epic then. And I want to remind everyone, and I'm sure many people know this, that at the time that Nyane rolled out this epic, the French version at least, in 1960 with Présence Africaine, and then again in 1965 when Pickett translated into English, it came out in the Longman edition, the consensus among European literary scholars was that there were no epics in Africa, that Africa did not have an epic. Of course, Nyane Sunjata put an end to that speculation. And I note that whatever the political or ideological struggles motivating and undergirding this birth of Sunjata, making it available to the world as a whole, I consider some of those potential struggles might have been the imminent Mali-Senegal Federation, Senghor's assertion and institutionalizing of negritude, the ambition of the Dakar School scholars of epic, as well as the Dakar School tendency in visual arts, the soon-to-be Festival of Black Arts, which took place in 1966. Whatever all of those underlying issues are that are not visible in the surface of this epic, that birthing was a critical gesture for African literature. And I want to note also that at that point, as apparently was true also for the Chinese, there may have been some anxiety around the absence or supposed absence of an epic, which would provide a proof of sorts of the dignity and laurels of a high civilization. I think there are 2 interesting issues related to this question. First, what could be called the temporality of the composition of the epic. And you may have noticed, but I never noticed it until recently, because I'm working on a project with Karen Barber and Biodun Jefo of Nigeria. Karen, who teaches at the University of Binghamton in the UK. We're working on a project called Literature, a World History. And Karen has written a lot about that. And she had something to say for this book, this 4-volume anthology that we're working on. And I thought that this was really interesting to think about this with respect to Sunjata. And I consider, and I've noticed since we started that project, that in fact, neither the Présence Africaine edition nor the Longman edition ever attempts to give a date to when this epic might have been composed. When would the epic have been composed? Neither text ever talks about that. And I think that's a lost opportunity because it gives us a chance to have a discussion about the richness and complexity of oral transmission. As you may know, some authorities believe that the epic, the Sunjata epic, may have been composed during Sunjata's reign in the 13th century, but others believe that it was composed at a distance from those events as a homage and a recovery of the events of Sunjata's reign to help consolidate a subsequent state. Now, I'm no political scientist or historian, but I think this is interesting. And I want to just read you an excerpt from our forthcoming Literature or World History. This part is essentially written by Karen Barber, so just bear with me. So she says, this comes from volume 2, and volume 2 is focused on the years 200 to 1500 Common Era, 200 to 1500. And this is what she has contributed. This is just a very tiny part of it, but this is what she says. As we have indicated, the great bulk of African language literature was oral in this period. It came to be written down, partially, only in the 19th or 20th centuries. The work of writing culture undertaken by early African intellectuals involved a selective recuperation and transcription of oral traditions. The time of origin of most of these traditions is unknown, and guesses by scholars have varied widely by centuries. various kinds of speculation come into play. Were epics dynastic poems and praise poems composed at the time of the events, rulers, or polities they celebrate? Or were they composed retrospectively? Is it possible to separate a core original text from subsequent accretions and distortions? This was the ambition of pioneering efforts at oral historiography. But in the process of separating the presumed wheat from the alleged chaff, we are likely to lose sight of the rich and complex textuality of oral forms. Perhaps then we should be thinking in terms of a palimpsest, an assemblage of oral materials created at different dates and transmitted sometimes independently, sometimes intertwined, such that many apparently unitary texts are internally multi-temporal. If that is the case, each element not only brings with it its own provenance, but each has also inevitably been gradually and incrementally modified in the course of its transition, some elements probably more than others. A case in point is Sunjata, the great Mande epic celebrating the foundation of the Mali Empire in the 13th century. This epic has been documented in more than 35 versions. All detailed transcriptions date from the 20th century. Some of the scholars concerned in this work of documentation believe that the epic was composed soon after the events it describes. But many others, including D.T. Niane, pioneer among Malian oral literature scholars, have concluded that it was more likely to have been a nostalgic retrospective created in the 17th or 18th centuries, after the disappearance of the last vestiges of the Mande Empire's power and glory. But no one suggests that the epic was created from scratch 500 years after the reign of Sunjata Keita. Rather, the hypothesis is that it was built up from materials that had already been in circulation for centuries: praise poetry, folk tales, and songs. There is strong evidence of the existence of a praise poetry tradition at the Malian court only 100 years after the reign of Sunjata. The Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta witnessed it in 1352, Common Era, and describes a performance in detail, observing that the tradition appeared already to be very old. The ethnography of contemporary praise poetry shows that new elements are composed and added to a corpus of praises in response to events as they unfold, or in response to their subjects' characters as they become manifest. If this was so in the time of Sunjata, then these core elements would have been transmitted with incremental modifications continuously from the 13th century till the 17th or 18th century, when these elements were available to form the core of a new narrative genre, the heroic epic. That's the quote from Karen that I think is so relevant to what we've been hearing and thinking about this morning, at least this morning here on the East Coast of the US. Okay, so that's the first point I wanted to make with respect to the then of my title, the call of the epic then and now, the then of the moment, the temporality, the moment in which this epic was created, or the multiple moments in which this epic was created and adorned, elaborated upon, etc. The second issue I want to raise with respect to the composition of the epic is the matter of the yardstick by which we determine whether a text is an epic. And here I'm drawing on an article by Mamadou Diouf. It's called something like The Invention of Oral Literature, I believe. It's actually in a book that Bioden Jafo and I edited a few years ago called The Locations and Dislocations of African Literature. Okay, and all I have is one sentence from that because I don't want to take up too much time. Mamadou Diouf talks about what he calls the tyranny of the Greek paradigm, which is to say that the scholars, certainly in Dakar, were working from a yardstick, which was essentially a Greek yardstick. And they were determining to what extent any text could be called an epic in West Africa if it did or didn't meet this yardstick of the Greek paradigm. So that's one thing. The outside measure, the outside metric by which we determine what is an epic. And the second part of that is the creation of a text, which is as much a matter of reception as it is of enunciation. These are two arguments in Mamadou Diouf's article, both the tyranny, what he calls the tyranny of the Greek paradigm, and the creation of a text, which for him, and I think which really for all of us, is as much a matter of reception as it is of the composition by the single speaker. Okay. Now, I want to move on to the now of my title, okay? The call of the epic then and the call of the epic now. So here's what I want to say on this. Here I'm trying to think about the literary legacy of Sundiata. And in 1992, I published a book called African Novels and the Question of Orality, in which Nyane's and Kouyate's Sundiata played, as I would say, a starring role. My point being, at that point, I was making this argument in the book, an argument that I thought many scholars would not share. The argument was that oral traditions should not be read as authenticating the novel, which was viewed as an alien, imported form deemed by some as inappropriate for African publics. I argued rather that the structure of epics shaping the narrative was more important to communicating a social vision than was the mere representation of proverbs or riddles or tales woven into an epic. So the epic as shaping narrative, as contributing to the thinking through of narrative, as opposed to being an ornament within narrative. And I had two examples, which I'll just mention. What I saw was the way in which the epic Sundiata in particular had shaped the depiction of Amadou Hampâté Bâ's Le Destin de Vangrain, or The Fortunes of Vangrain, which was published, I believe, in the mid-80s, revealing the problematic of heroism under colonialism. That was the first text where I tried to show how the Sundiata epic had participated in creating a text which exposed the problematic of heroism under colonialism. The second text was Semben's Les Bouts de Bois de Dieu, God's Bits of Wood, in which I think Semben modified the epic, democratizing the epic to propose and prophesy a modern nation. So that was my own take on the ways in which the Sundiata epic in particular had an impact on later compositions, later narratives, such as novels. Now, finally, I want to mention a new book by Jonathan Repanec, Subversive Traditions, published in 2019. And I just want to say what his objective was in doing this book. It's all about epics and the possibilities of epics, the capacity of epics to challenge, to subvert, to renew, to criticize. And so here's at least my summation of what he tries to do in this book. His objective is to demonstrate that, quote unquote, tradition is dynamic and contingent rather than settled and bound. West African epics are vehicles of critical thinking that can and do engage the now of today. A particular virtue of Repanec's book is that he has ventured out of the arena of abstract debate on this question and has explored historical foundations and material contexts. So I don't know whether I've been sufficiently clear for everyone to sort of understand what I've said, but if not, I'm happy to join in a conversation about any of these issues that I've raised. Thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this panel again. Okay, that's it.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Eileen. That quote from Karen Baba just basically set up some kind of alarms in my head, because it was very much close to what I've been thinking the past few years. So you said it right. thank you also for the subsequent one from Rafinesh that you made me aware of quite recently. So thank you to all participants. It's quite incredible to have all of you here, and really it's like a celebration of an elderly African who sort of joined the ancestors and actually beaming down on us. Hopefully he's happy wherever he is now. We actually, because this is a panel rather than a single speaker thing, we've actually expended time, but we really can go on because it's really quite exciting and engaging. So I would just like to crave everybody's indulgence to thank you for your individual contributions and to say that we have a couple of questions on the chat that I will read out. I have one myself just to bring everything together because in very fascinating ways, you all sort of touch on things that can actually sort of pose the question to four of you. And so that's really very interesting. But I defer to those who posted things on the chat first, and then while waiting for subsequent questions, I might just ask my own. So the first question is from Kankan Lusambe, who's a leading figure in African literature, asking for any one of you who might just be able to know. And by the way, you can actually turn on your videos and audios really so that we can hear and see you. It's fine now. We all should be able to be visible, including Mohammed. Thank you, and Fatou too. So the question from, and anyone can take this, it's a general question by Lusambe, Professor Lusambe, is whether in your individual, and this may pertain more to both Lucy and Fatou, who've had direct contact with Jibril Niane, whether you know by any chance that he commented or has any kind of opinion about the film Keita, Heritage of the Griot, that Dani Kouyate, the Burkinabe filmmaker, made in 1995, fairly long. It's a film that actually sort of tries to tell a story around the epic, and so it's called Keita, Heritage of the Griot. So the question is whether you know in your research about this figure, whether he has any kind of comments, general reflection on this film. So if you want to take that. The other question is from Cheryl Keita, who is a very well-known professor and scholar of Mande studies at Carleton University. The question is really more of a comment. It says it is crucial to take into account Mande terminology related to the genre, that is the Fasa, that is praise song, and derived from Fasia, the family heritage. So this actually is some kind of contextual information that both us and both we and those who are sort of listening to these will find useful to process. So, but if you want to take that question first, that is either Fatou or Lucy, if you can just sort of present us with general information about that. And while waiting or hearing from you, I will also ask a question of everyone that you can all take turns to answer.
The only time I met Niane was at the Mansa conference in Kankan in 2005. We did not discuss we certainly didn't discuss the film, but I can imagine, I can imagine who would have adored that film. That's all I can say. It is a wonderful film, very charming, with the marvelous Sotigi Kouyate, who of course was a Jali. Yeah. Fatoumata, peut-être vous pouvez savoir mieux que moi, parce que si Niane connaissait le film de Dani Kouyate, qu'est-ce qu'il a pensé de ça, etc. Vous avez une idée?
Je ne vous ai pas bien entendu. Est-ce que vous pouvez reprendre la question? Je ne l'ai pas bien entendu.
Je dis qu'il y a quelqu'un qui demande, est-ce que Niane avait vu le film de Dani Kouyate, Keita, l'héritage de Griot, et qu'est-ce qu'il a pensé de ça? C'est ça la question. Vous m'attendez maintenant?
Oui, je vous suis maintenant. Bon, Je ne crois pas, hein, parce que moi-même, personnellement, c'est ma première fois d'entendre parler de ces films-là.
Ah bon?
Je ne me suis pas beaucoup plus intéressée du côté dramaturge, hein, parce qu'il était un dramaturge, il participait à la réalisation de certains films. Mais en tant que professeur d'histoire de l'Afrique contemporaine, je ne me suis pas beaucoup plus intéressée du côté musique, mais je me suis très focalisée sur ces ouvrages, hein, ces écrits sur l'histoire, hein, du Manding, de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, ainsi que des récits, des contes africains qu'il a eu à partager.
Unfortunately, I am not familiar with Kouyate's film, Keita l'héritage du griot, given my focus on texts, books, and the history of the Mande Empire. And so I cannot say anything beyond that about whether.
Bon, je ne sais pas si je n'ai pas compris sa question, s'il parle de sa fille ou s'il parle des films, je ne sais pas.
Non, tu as bien compris la question.
Ah, d'accord. Oui. Ça marche.
Merci.
Oui.
All right. So thank you. So let me ask this general question, which in very interesting ways all of you sort of touch upon, and I was quite gratified to hear that in very different ways. So this is how I'll put it. I began actually while listening to both Chiji and Fatou. I heard the fact that they sort of talked about the importance of the griot in relation to the power of the king. That is, in that opening quote, that we make the king the memory that there's no king without being able to talk about it. So, and then when Lucy also talked about the quotation about what Kouyaté can say or cannot say, and then the closing quotation about the dominance of books. And when Eileen also talked about the lack of dating for the composition of the I was hearing something that's really been quite interesting in terms of the critique from certain, or maybe not so much critique as reassessment, the kind of comment you made about, that is Eileen, the comment you made about Ousmane Sembène using the epic to modernize it and sort of suggest the modern nation, so to speak. So what I hear there is actually, generally speaking, a critique of not so much the griot, but the tradition within which the griot developed and has actually been if you want, perpetrated in the course of African history and African literary history also. So I guess that what I want people to speak is this question of reassessment, because when you think about it, figures not so much, not just Ousmane Sembène, but also figures like Ayikwe Ama and in very different ways, Paulin Hotonji. These are people who have actually been critical of traditions of not so much the oral people, the tradition, the importance of royal power, or those elements of African history that are about secrecy, lack of democracy. And so when you say that, when even Waka Misoko, the griot Waka Misoko that Yusuf Tata Sise recorded, also refused to say certain things. So I guess I'm just interested in this idea because in some cases, the so-called, even when the griot has so much power to be able to validate the power of the king, he or she, or in most cases he, is also at the service of the king and can actually falsify history to sort of validate that royal power. So I'm just wondering how we sort of relate to this, especially in terms of now in case of Niane's own position in relationship to this history. We've sort of spoken to him or spoken about him, valorizing him or validating his work. Can we at least maybe think through this in a more critical way? I'm just throwing it out there because I find that in very interesting ways, all of you sort of responded to this, and I want us to sort of take that a bit further. So if you may, pitch in how you want to. Thank you.
Okay. Can I just do a quick? Voilà, Fatou.
Oui.
Voilà. Bon, la question que professeur Hakim vient de poser concerne la possible réévaluation du pouvoir du griot sur le roi et sur les faits historiques. Est-ce que ce serait une activité juste de réévaluer, de réexaminer le pouvoir du griot concernant les faits historiques et la création, comme tu as bien dit, des rois? Voilà, donc c'est en bref la question qu'il vient de poser.
Oui, bien sûr. Vous savez, comme je vous ai dit, les griots sont très, très importants dans le Manding. Parce qu'à l'époque des royaumes et des grands empires, sans le griot, le roi n'était rien. Il n'était rien parce que c'est le griot qui faisait ses louanges, qui le glorifiait lorsqu'il se sentait faible face à l'adversaire, par exemple. C'est le griot qui était là pour lui encourager, pour lui donner conseil, en lui rappelant de la responsabilité du peuple qui compte sur lui, de la population qui compte sur lui. Ça, c'est un. Deuxièmement, les griots, je vous ai dit que ce sont des médiateurs. Jusqu'à aujourd'hui, lorsqu'il y a un conflit entre les différents, il se peut que les politiques échouent. Mais c'est les griots, partout où ils vont pour une médiation, ils n'échouent jamais. Je peux vous donner un exemple qui est juste contemporain. Après les indépendances en Afrique, il y a eu ce qu'on appelle les conflits frontaliers entre les différents États. Par exemple, entre le Mali, la République du Mali, qui était appelée le Soudan occidental, et le Burkina Faso, il y a eu un conflit au niveau de la frontière. Mais finalement, ce conflit a été fini malgré toutes les négociations et les tentatives de médiation entamées par l'Organisation de l'Unité africaine à l'époque ont échoué. Cette fois-ci, c'est le célèbre griot Sori-Kanja Kouyaté qui a réussi à unir ces deux présidents à Conakry au Palais du Peuple. Donc, c'est pour vous dire que combien de fois la parole du griot est extrêmement importante parce que Sori-Kanja, à ces jours-là, il s'est servi de l'histoire du Manding. C'est servi de l'histoire du Manding parce que vous devez savoir qu'il y a une bonne partie aussi du Burkina Faso qui faisait partie de l'empire du Manding parce qu'on a vu qu'en Afrique, au Moyen Âge, la chute d'un empire donnait naissance à un autre empire. Donc, à chaque fois qu'il y a un nouveau empereur, il s'emparait du royaume vaincu. Donc, c'est l'ensemble de ces royaumes-là qui faisaient un empire. Donc, ces jours-là, lui, il s'est servi de l'histoire qui lie la République du Mali à la République du Burkina Faso pour finir ces conflits. Donc, même au jour d'aujourd'hui, actuellement, il y a des détenteurs de l'histoire dans le Manding parce que c'est une science, on peut dire que c'est une science ou une école qui se transmet de génération en génération, de père en fils. Donc, à chaque fois, on essaie de relater l'histoire. Et ces griots-là sont réellement qui font le roi un roi. Même au jour d'aujourd'hui, nos chefs d'État africains ont besoin des griots. Parce qu'à chaque fois, parfois, ils sont extrêmement importants dans le domaine de la médiation, des conseils, etc. Donc, je ne sais pas si j'ai pu satisfaire M. Adesonka.
Bon, en bref, merci beaucoup. Compte tenu de ce que tu viens de dire, en bref, est-ce que tu crois que les griots détiennent...
Il faut traduire, Mohamed, s'il vous plaît.
Non, je vais traduire.
Pour les personnes qui ne comprennent pas.
Non, j'allais traduire, mais je voulais poser d'abord la question, en fait, qui est la base de la question posée par le professeur Adesokan. Voilà. Crois-tu que les griots détiennent trop de pouvoir?
Les griots?
Oui.
Bien sûr, ils détiennent le pouvoir de la tradition. Ils détiennent ces pouvoirs-là. Parce que dans le Manding, j'ai cité quelque part où Soundiata Keita a fait la guerre contre Soumaoro Kanté pour récupérer son griot Bala Faseke. Parce que Bala Faseke, si vous avez lu l'épopée du Manding, Bala Faseke était le griot de Soundiata Keita avant sa fuite pour aller à Mema. Donc, Bala Fasake qui est venu dans le Soso avec la jeune sœur de Soundiata Keita pour la marier à Soumaoro Kanté, a joué le balafon mystique de Soumaoro Kanté. Et ce balafon a été interdit de tous. Personne n'avait le droit de s'approcher de ce balafon, à plus forte raison de jouer avec. Mais Bala Fasake a eu ce courage ce jour-là, il a joué au balafon. Soumaoro étant très fâché, très remonté, est venu pour lui trancher la tête. Et finalement, c'est Bala Fasake qui fait ses louanges, qui le glorifie. Et lui, depuis ce temps, personne n'avait fait encore ses gloires, ou personne n'avait fait ses louanges. Donc, pour la première fois, quelqu'un a fait ses louanges. Dans ces louanges-là, il lui a parlé de sa puissance, de ce qu'il était capable. Et finalement, il a su que oui, le griot est extrêmement important. Il lui a tenu en otage dans son royaume pour le garder avec lui, compte tenu de son utilité. Parce qu'il a vu en Bala Fasake un griot qui pouvait lui donner d'utiles conseils, qui pouvait vraiment lui mettre sur la bonne voie pour gérer son royaume. Donc, au jour d'aujourd'hui, les griots détiennent vraiment ces pouvoirs-là. Même lors de nos cérémonies, actuellement, sans les griots, les cérémonies n'ont pas de valeur. Parce que pour animer les cérémonies, pour donner de la valeur à nos cérémonies, que ce soit les cérémonies traditionnelles ou autres, nous avons toujours besoin des griots. Même au cours de nos funérailles, les griots sont extrêmement importants. Ils sont là. Donc, ils détiennent vraiment ces pouvoirs-là.
So in short, the griots have a lot of power. And as I indicated in my presentation earlier on, they are twin role. Of course, they perform more than two roles. First as counselors to kings and their knowledge of history and diplomatic protocol and the advice to give to kings and emperors. So they have a lot of influence over kings. And in terms of their role as mediators in times of conflict, inciting, even in contemporary context, for example, the conflict between African nations, Mali and Burkina Faso, and the intervention specifically of, Kanja, during one of those conflicts was able to use his knowledge of history to help these nations resolve the conflicts that are generated by these geometric boundaries created during the colonial period. And of course, as I indicated, the war that Soundiata fought against Soumanguru was instigated principally by many, according to many, by the desire to liberate his griot Bala Faseke, who had managed to capture the attention of Soumanguru Kante through his knowledge of music and the playing of the balafon. And of course, his capacity to praise kings as well, of course, which ended up saving his life. So the griots are powerful, to be short, and they perform a very important role in the past, but also in modern society.
Yes, Eileen.
Okay, let's see. I just want to say that with respect to the two novels I talked about and the way in which they incorporate aspects of. Can you hear me? Yeah, I can be heard, right?
Yes.
Okay, so with respect to the way that Vongrin and God's Bits of Wood integrate, I would say, epic legacies into their narratives. The griot, in fact, doesn't figure at all, if I'm remembering correctly, Vongrin. There's no griot, and certainly there's none in God's Bits of Wood, as I recall. Because in fact, Sembène was really, I think he felt that there were aspects of traditional culture that were too feudal. And Sembène was really interested with a kind of realist perspective. He was much more interested in the ways in which ordinary people could come together to make change. That's what I see. That's why I think of God's Bits of Wood as a democratizing epic. he has left the kingly personage and has thought about ways in which ordinary people come together to struggle for what they want. So I don't see a place for a griot, although frankly, I'm sure everybody knows this, people often talk about Sembène as the griot, as a griot, the griot. And I don't know how he felt about that, but in his novel, the griot cedes the place to ordinary people who come together as a collective to struggle. In Vangrin, for me, that novel is a cross between epic and tricksterhood. So it's different. But just to say that Sembène often said that, he said, oh, old Africa. I mean, he was not romanticizing the Africa of tradition. Yeah, I guess that's, and it reminds me also of a comment by Biodun Jefo, who's Nigerian, when he had a critique of Wole Soyinka's play, Death in the King's Horseman. Death in the King's Horseman. Why? Because he felt that there were other traditions from the past that would have been more helpful, more constructive than to come back to a kind of feudal, a feudal comportment behavior where the horseman has to die because the king has died. So I see a parallel, and of course BJ is also quite, I would say, materialist, like Sembène in some sense. So I see a way in which there's a departure from the griot as a central character at least with respect to Jafo's critique of Death in the King's Horseman and Sembène's critique of, in God's Bits of Wood, where he's trying to pull people together. And in fact, there's one scene in that novel that I really love. It's when Bakayoko, the sort of leader, if you will, of the strike in some sense, is greeted by this old woman in the crowd who's lost her son and her husband to France in wars. And she says, do you have your mother's story? He says, no. She says, when you come now to Bamako, when you come, you will come to my house. You will be my son. That's what, and so I see that as a shift from a feudal order to a familiar order. And so that's my perspective on that. I just thought it was important to add that comment. And people may disagree.
Est-ce que vous pouvez traduire un peu ce que professeur Julien vient de dire? Parce que
Mohamed.
Oui, professeur Julien, ça va?
Oui, ça va, oui, vas-y.
Ah, d'accord.
OK, parce que, d'accord.
Voilà. Donc, désolé d'avance. Bon, c'est que le professeur Julien vient de dire par rapport au griot, citant l'exemple de Vangrin, l'étrange destin de Vangrin d'Amadou Hampâté-Bâ et les bouts de bois de Dieu de Sembène Ousmane, c'est en principe l'absence du griot dans ces deux grands textes. Et qu'est-ce que cela veut dire? Cela veut dire que, bon, le griot n'occupe pas cette place primordiale dans l'imaginaire, dans la pensée de Hampâté-Bâ et de Sembène Ousmane dans ces textes. Ces deux auteurs, dans ces textes en particulier, privilégient en quelque sorte la réalité contemporaine, la société moderne qui est en voie de développement ou en voie de se créer. Donc, en bref, je crois que c'est ce que la professeure Julien a dit.
Je voulais dire qu'il donne le premier rôle au collectif, aux gens, aux ouvriers, aux paysans. Il donne au moins Sembène. Je ne peux pas vraiment parler pour Vangrin, mais Sembène, il veut proposer qu'on se mette ensemble pour travailler, pour aller devant. Voilà, c'est tout. Et voilà.
OK, c'est bien. Seulement, je crois que j'ai lu Les bouts de bois de Dieu. J'ai lu également aussi L'étrange destin de Wangrin. Je me rappelle, je l'ai lu. C'est important, mais c'est que je crois qu'en ce moment-là aussi, c'était la période de la colonisation également, où les gens étaient vraiment préoccupés aussi à d'autres soucis. Vous voyez, comme j'ai dit tantôt dans l'un de mes passages là, que lorsque la colonisation a commencé, vraiment, les griots ont été laissés pour compte, quoi, parce qu'on les considérait vraiment comme des gens qui demandent, qui font des lois juste pour avoir quelque chose, ce qui était le contraire, et c'est ce que Djibril Niane a prouvé dans son célèbre ouvrage L'épopée du Manding. Je crois que le professeur Julien vient de signaler est extrêmement important, parce que les bouts de bois de Dieu, là, ça parle vraiment du quotidien, hein? Oui. Hein, des populations à l'époque sur le chemin de fer Dakar-Niger, oui. Si je me rappelle bien. Donc, c'est très bien.
Can we have Lucy respond to this as quickly as possible, if you want to have a take, because I think maybe your schedule is blowing over and we don't want to keep you unnecessarily, but if you want to just quickly make a take to this, would that be helpful? Can you do that, please?
Yes, just in brief. I met and spent a week, in fact, in the company of Ousmane Sembène and also the late Ousmane Sow Ouchar at a festival dedicated to Senegal in Spain, La Mar de Músicas, which had just a lot of Senegalese artists, including Youssou N'Dour, etc. And I mean, Sembène he adored music. He was a huge fan of Senegalese music. He was critical of some griots, but very, very supportive of others. So I think he really liked the musicians who he felt stood for the real values of the good values, the real values, the universal, the perennial values. That was the kind of conversation that we had around griots, but he also felt that there were faux griots, bad griots, false griots, who just took advantage of their position in society to do, to beg and ask for things.
Yeah,
didn't represent the good side. But I think I know from the many conversations that we had in that week that he, for instance, Samba Jabare Sam, who he features in his film Khala, he had great respect for him, and many others too. So that's really all I can add.
Yeah, and also in the film Chedo, he has this figure of the griot in two places. There's the one who serves the king and the one who is with the Chedo, who doesn't speak, but who is always carrying, I think it's a balafon. So it's actually quite interesting how Ousmane Sembène sort of relates to that figure, that within the film, he has the court, but the one who basically distorts history to serve the king, but there is also the one who is permanently with the Chedo. So that, in fact, is a very interesting way in which I think Sembène relates to that thing. And then there's also a quick question, a quick comment, again from Cherif Keita, drawing our attention, and says actually in relation to Eileen that there's a griot among the sources. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, I must go. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate your effort.
Merci, Fatoumata. Mohammed, you are a brilliant translator.
Yes.
Eileen, I loved your comments. Akin, thank you so much for inviting all of us and all of us and getting this going. And Chiji, thank you for your wonderful opening remarks. Okay, je m'en vais.
I'd love to, because I wasn't able to hear everything. If you, I will email you.
But you weren't able to hear my audio clips, is that right?
Well, there was a confusion.
Il faut traduire parce que je ne suis pas bien là.
But if I can email you, I'll email you.
You can, please do.
Okay, thank you.
Voilà. Donc, elle est en train de dire au revoir, professeur Duran. Elle dit qu'elle a bien aimé les prestations, les interventions de tout le monde.
Merci. Au revoir.
Le plaisir est partagé également.
Oui, j'aime beaucoup.
Non. Merci à vous, à bientôt.
Et partagé, parce qu'en français, on dit tout le plaisir est pour moi. Je trouve ça comme. Mais juste pour dire que je n'ai rien contre les griots quand même, et je pense que Semben reconnaît bien l'importance du griot dans certains contextes. Je dis simplement pour ce roman-là, et je ne parle pas des autres, je ne parle pas d'autres romans, je parle de celui-là, il essaie de proposer la force, la possibilité d'action d'un groupe de gens qui partagent les mêmes intérêts. Ce n'est pas contre les griots du tout, mais je le lis comme ça, son roman. Vraiment pour que les gens sachent qu'ils ont le pouvoir entre eux. Tout ce qui se passe, le tribunal là, pour le vieux qui a triché, etc., c'est pour que les gens reconnaissent leur propre capacité d'agir. C'est tout ce que je voulais dire.
Ouais. La valorisation de la collectivité.
Chiji, did you understand that?
No.
No.
Yeah, but
I'm just saying I have nothing against griots, but I think in that particular, and I'm not saying Semben had anything against griots, but in that particular novel, it seems to me, while I see the structure, an epic structure, I think he's very much trying to make people see that they have the capacity to act. A collective energy can change things. That's how I read that.
Yeah, for me, I always think that it's what you were saying in the book, your collection, it's about location of culture. I think that's the title of our book together. This location of it. Because it seems to me that the griot tradition, or at least the one that Nyane, valorizes through the text, the Sunjata text that we have, is one that is effectively feudalistic, that will very much align with, the critique that BJ was giving of Death and the King's Horseman. Right. I think there's a commonality in that particular politics. I look at the text itself, the way it ends, I mean, it's very significant that we know that, the end of Sunjata, there is controversy over how he died, but I think the common information that he drowned. We don't know the circumstances of the drowning, but we know that he died not in such a very heroic way. But we don't hear that here. Kouyaté doesn't take the story that far. In fact, the way the story ends is, don't even dare ask. And I'm going to tell you only what I want to tell you. And whatever I don't need to tell you, I'll keep to myself. So it goes against that kind of Semben, ethos, or even Ngugi. Say, if you think about Petals of Blood and these big books that are just trying to bring community more, a diverse community. So there is certainly a critique that can be made of the politics, whose voice is being represented, whose politics is being, who is being glorified as a way. I think there is ample room for us to think about.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you. There are a few comments actually from you all can see them. And I just want to quickly read them since we are coming to the end of this. And really, it's been quite nice for all of you to sit with us and really talk about this. So the comments are actually like contextual information from Cherif Keita, again, very helpful colleague, saying that, in fact, pointing to the presence of a griot in Amadou Hampatiba's Green story. That is the jelly man who actually filled him in about the last year of One Green's life. And also to say that the jelly themselves make a distinction between the magician of the world and the jelly, who is just an ordinary praise singer. So in fact, it is not so much that it's colonialism, as Niane says at the beginning of in the preface, that it is colonialism that's really sort of broken down the tradition of the griot. And in fact, even within the history, that there was already distinction between the jelly and between the Ngara and the jelly. So it's actually quite interesting to think of it like that. And when you go back again to the point that Karim Baba makes about the nature of the epic, that there's always been antagonism in any social formation. That even back then, okay, there's all this struggle within the society about who occupies one place. And in fact, that even the story of Bala Fale Seke being liberated by Sundiata could actually be understood as some kind of power struggle. It's actually interesting to sort of think about it. I thought I would say that, but in any case, if you want to add anything, that would be helpful. But again, since we've really been taking your time, I'm really happy to have a closing remark if anyone wants to pitch in at this point. Mohamed, do you want to help us translate?
Oh,
yes. Yes, thank you.
Voilà, bien, Fatou.
Oui.
Il vient, donc, Akin vient de répondre, bien sûr, à tous les commentaires, à tout ce qui vient d'être dit par nous autres concernant le griot, le statut du griot, et cette tension, en quelque sorte, entre les Ngara et le Djeli, dans le contexte, si vous voulez, de l'histoire et de la culture du Manding et de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Et nous, bien sûr, nous pouvons voir cela dans ces textes, tous ces textes mentionnés, mais en général dans les récits concernant le griot et l'Ngara dans le contexte de l'Afrique occidentale. Bien sûr, ce n'est pas une situation simpliste, n'est-ce pas? C'est une réalité assez complexe compte tenu du statut du griot, de sa valeur vis-à-vis les intérêts des rois et les intérêts du peuple, les sujets des rois. Bon, je crois avoir compris un peu ce que le professeur Akin a dit et traduit également.
Oui. D'accord, c'est compris.
Okay, all right. Well, again, thanks to all of you, and thanks that, sorry that Lucy had to run. She wasn't here when we want to make our closing remarks. This has actually been extremely helpful and useful, and so thank you for staying with us, for giving us the benefit of your knowledge and expertise, and you have other things to do. So for agreeing, we really are very grateful, and this brings our series this year, academic year, to a close. And so I want to thank you individually and collectively for doing this for us, and other points, but we really want to give you our gratitude and to say that, in fact, it is really meet that it is in the honor of this extremely interesting figure of culture in African literary history that we are closing this session. So thank you, all of you, and please have a good afternoon, and thank you.
Grand merci d'avoir donné votre temps et d'avoir partagé votre expertise en la matière. Je suis très reconnaissant de tout cela et merci et à la prochaine.
Merci. Je vous remercie tous. Ça a été un grand honneur pour moi également de prendre part à cette conférence.
J'espère un jour vous rencontrer quelque part.
S'il plaît à Dieu, si Dieu le veut bien, oui. J'espère vraiment.
Did well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good night. Yes.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Good night.
Okay. Moment. Akin.